I'm Ibrahim Wallace, 70 years old today, though there's little to celebrate. 6 hours ago, I watched my beloved Josephine take her final breath after 48 years of marriage. I haven't told anyone about the $40 million inheritance or the luxury penthouse in Manhattan with my name on the deed. This evening, my only son Thomas screamed at me to leave the home Josephine and I built together. "Pack your bags. The old man doesn't belong here." I simply nodded. "All right. If you're watching this, let me know where you're from and hit subscribe for what happened next." Life began for me in the industrial South Side of Chicago, where factory whistles dictated the rhythm of our neighborhood. My father worked 40 years at the steel mill, coming home with hands so calloused they felt like sandpaper when he patted my shoulder. Mother cleaned houses for the wealthy families uptown, returning with stories about how the other half lived. Together they instilled in me a work ethic that became my foundation. "Ibrahim," my father would say, "nobody will give you anything in this life. You earn every dollar with sweat and every friendship with loyalty." Those words followed me through my youth as I delivered newspapers before school, stocked groceries on weekends, and studied by lamplight while others slept. When I turned 18, I became the first Wallace to attend college. It wasn't a fancy university, just the state school where I could afford tuition by working 3 jobs simultaneously. Mornings at the campus cafeteria, afternoons in the administration office, and weekend shifts at a local garage. Sleep was a luxury I couldn't afford, but education was my ticket to something better. Business administration became my focus. Numbers made sense to me in a way people sometimes didn't. I could see patterns, predict outcomes, and identify inefficiencies that others missed. My professors noticed, but I had little time for academic recognition. Every minute was accounted for in my relentless schedule. Then came that Tuesday in April, my junior year. Low on cash and even lower on sleep, I stumbled into Mabel's Diner for their 99-cent breakfast special. The place smelled of bacon and coffee, and the vinyl booths had seen better days. That's when Josephine Williams walked into my life, coffee pot in hand, and a smile that made me forget my exhaustion. "You look like you could use the whole pot," she said, filling my cup without waiting for an answer. Her voice carried a melodic quality that seemed out of place in the greasy spoon establishment. I became a regular at Mabel's, choosing the same booth each time, hoping Josephine would be working. We exchanged small talk that gradually deepened into real conversation. I learned she was studying literature at the private university across town, working at the diner to assert her independence from parents who wanted to control her future. "They have my life planned out," she confided one slow afternoon. "The right schools, the right neighborhood, the right husband from the right family." She wrinkled her nose. "None of it feels right to me." Josephine came from money, old money. Her father owned a chain of department stores across the Midwest, and her mother organized charity galas where the minimum donation exceeded my yearly tuition. When she finally agreed to date me, we kept it secret from her family. Our worlds couldn't have been more different. I took her to jazz clubs where the music was good and the cover charge affordable. She showed me art galleries and snuck me into symphony performances through service entrances she knew from volunteer work. Every moment together felt stolen from a life that wasn't supposed to be mine. Her parents inevitably discovered our relationship. Mr. Williams made his position clear during an uncomfortable dinner at their lakeside mansion. "You seem like a decent young man, Ibrahim," he said, cutting his steak with surgical precision. "But surely you understand that Josephine has certain obligations to her background and upbringing." Mrs. Williams nodded in agreement. "We've already introduced her to several suitable young men. Harvard graduates, family connections, proper pedigree." I remained silent throughout the meal, but later that night, Josephine and I made our decision. 2 weeks after graduation, we eloped. A simple ceremony at the courthouse with 2 strangers as witnesses. Her parents cut her off financially, just as she predicted. Our first apartment could have fit into her parents' foyer. A 5th-floor walk-up with temperamental plumbing and neighbors who argued loudly in languages we didn't understand. But it was ours, and we furnished it piece by piece from thrift stores and sidewalk findings that Josephine would restore with surprising skill. I found work at an accounting firm, while Josephine took a position teaching at a community center. Our combined income barely covered expenses, but we were young and in love, and certain that better days lay ahead. Our first entrepreneurial venture came when a local hardware store owner decided to retire. The business was struggling, outdated, but located in a neighborhood showing early signs of renewal. With our combined savings and a terrifying loan, we became small business owners. Wallace Hardware read the new sign I installed myself. Josephine painted the storefront a welcoming blue and reorganized the interior to feel less cluttered. We worked 14-hour days, learning the business from the ground up, making mistakes and solving problems together. When Thomas was born 3 years later, we converted the storage room into a makeshift nursery. Our customers grew accustomed to seeing Josephine helping them find the right tool while carrying our son in a sling across her chest. He grew up amid the scent of sawdust and metal, falling asleep to the sound of the cash register and friendly conversations with regulars. "He's going to have opportunities we never had," Josephine would whisper as we watched him sleep. I nodded in agreement, not realizing the complexity that simple wish would eventually bring into our lives. Josephine and I discovered we made an exceptional business team. My analytical mind complemented her intuitive understanding of people and trends. Where I saw numbers and logistics, she saw relationships and possibilities. Together, we began transforming that single struggling hardware store into something more. "People don't just want tools," Josephine observed one evening as we reviewed our monthly figures. "They want solutions to problems they don't fully understand." What if we offered classes? Basic home repair, weekend projects for beginners? The classes became standing room only events. Customers who came for a single lesson returned for supplies, advice, and the community we were building. Within 2 years, we had the capital to open a second location in a neighboring suburb. By the time Thomas started school, we owned 5 stores across Chicago. Josephine developed our marketing strategy, creating seasonal campaigns that outperformed national chains in our areas. I focused on operations, developing inventory systems that maximized our cash flow and minimized waste. "We should consider expanding beyond hardware," Josephine suggested at the 10-year mark. Home design, custom cabinetry, full-service renovations. Each calculated risk paid dividends. We moved from our apartment to a modest house, then to a larger home in a good school district. Thomas never knew the financial struggles of our early years. His childhood was comfortable, with summer camps, private school, and vacations we could only have dreamed about in our youth. As our business grew, I noticed subtle changes in our son. Where Josephine and I saw expenses as investments to consider carefully, Thomas developed an expectation of instant gratification. The latest toys, designer clothes, and technology appeared on his wish lists with increasing price tags. "We don't want him to struggle like we did," Josephine would say when I expressed concern. "But the struggling is what built our character," I countered. "How will he value anything if everything comes easily?" We tried to instill our values alongside the privileges. Thomas had chores and responsibilities. We established allowances rather than opening our wallets on demand. Yet the contrast between his upbringing and ours created an invisible barrier. He couldn't truly understand the lessons we were trying to teach. When Thomas was 16, we expanded beyond Chicago, acquiring a struggling regional chain of home improvement stores across the Midwest. The risk nearly broke us. For 6 months, we mortgaged everything to make payroll while revamping 27 locations simultaneously. We could lose everything, I confessed to Josephine during that stressful period. She squeezed my hand. Or we could build something extraordinary. She was right. 2 years later, a national competitor approached us with an acquisition offer that we declined. Instead, we continued expanding, developing our own product lines and distribution networks. By Thomas's college graduation, Wallace Home Enterprises operated in 12 states with over 2,000 employees. Throughout this growth, Josephine remained the heart of our business. While I managed the expanding operational complexities, she maintained our company culture and community connections. Every store continued her tradition of educational workshops and local partnerships. Our employees stayed with us for decades, many becoming like extended family. Thomas showed little interest in the business that consumed our lives. He attended an exclusive business school on the East Coast, but his interests leaned toward quick returns rather than sustainable growth. His summer internships at investment banks emphasized maximizing profit over creating value. When he brought Amanda home during his senior year, Josephine and I exchanged concerned glances. Amanda was polished and poised, with an uncanny ability to say exactly what she thought we wanted to hear. Her questions about the business focused exclusively on revenue figures and future valuation. "She makes him happy," Josephine reminded me after they left. "That's what matters." I wasn't convinced, but kept my reservations private. When they married the following year, we gave them a generous down payment for a house and welcomed Amanda into the family with open arms, despite my private concerns. As we approached 60, Josephine and I began discussing succession plans. Thomas had taken a position at a venture capital firm in New York, making it clear that returning to Chicago to run the family business wasn't in his plans. After much consideration, we decided to sell. The negotiations lasted 11 months, culminating in an offer that still seemed surreal when we signed the final papers. $47 million. More money than the young couple who once counted pennies for laundry could have imagined. After taxes and allocations to long-term employees, we retained just over $40 million. We purchased a comfortable but not ostentatious home on Lake Michigan and a penthouse in Manhattan to be near Thomas and Amanda. We established college funds for employees' children and donated to the community organizations that supported us in the early days. The bulk of our wealth went into secure investments that would sustain us and eventually provide for Thomas and his future children. 1 month after finalizing the sale, Josephine complained of persistent back pain. 2 weeks of tests later, we sat in a sterile office as an oncologist explained that cancer had already spread throughout her system. The prognosis was 3 years at best. Our retirement plans evaporated in the antiseptic air of that medical consultation room. Cancer transformed our lives overnight. Instead of traveling and enjoying our hard-earned retirement, our days revolved around doctor appointments, treatment schedules, and managing side effects. The disease was aggressive, requiring equally aggressive countermeasures that left Josephine exhausted and often in pain. I became her primary caregiver without hesitation. After 45 years together, handling her medications and accompanying her to chemotherapy sessions felt like a sacred duty. Each morning, I would help her to the bathroom, prepare her favorite tea, and sit beside her as she gathered strength for whatever the day would bring. "You should hire a nurse," Thomas suggested during his first visit after the diagnosis. He stayed at a hotel rather than in our guest room, explaining that Amanda had allergies that might be triggered by our lakeside home. "Your mother prefers my care," I replied simply. The truth was more complex. Josephine hated feeling vulnerable around others, particularly our son, whom she still wanted to protect from life's harsher realities. Thomas and Amanda visited infrequently over the next few months. Each visit followed a similar pattern. They would arrive, express appropriate sympathy, then find reasons to step outside for calls or meetings that couldn't wait. Their discomfort around illness was palpable, hanging in the air like the antiseptic smell that never quite left our home despite scented candles and fresh flowers. "How are the finances holding up?" Amanda asked during their third visit, while Josephine napped in the next room. "These treatments must be expensive, even with insurance." "We're managing fine," I assured her, changing the subject. We had more than enough money, but something in her tone struck me as calculating rather than concerned. During their fourth visit, 6 months into Josephine's treatment, Thomas broached the subject directly. "Dad, Amanda and I have been discussing your situation. Have you and Mom updated your will since the business sale?" Josephine, who had been quietly reading nearby, looked up sharply. "Our estate planning is complete and appropriate," she said with unexpected firmness. "Ibrahim and I have everything arranged." That night, after they left, Josephine called me to her bedside with unusual urgency. "Ibrahim, we need to talk about the inheritance," she said, her voice stronger than it had been in weeks. She expressed concerns about Thomas and particularly Amanda's interest in our finances. They see money as the solution to everything, the way we once saw love as the answer to all problems. Both perspectives are incomplete. Over the next several days, Josephine outlined changes she wanted to make to our estate plan. Most significantly, she didn't want Thomas to know the full extent of our wealth immediately upon her death. "It would be better for him to think there's less," she explained. I've watched how money has shaped his character. More won't make him happier or better. I struggled with her suggestion. Isn't that manipulative? Dishonest? Josephine took my hand, her fingers thin but her grip still surprisingly strong. It's protective, not punitive. Thomas needs time to develop values beyond material wealth. I won't be here to help him through that journey. This is my last gift to our son. We met with our attorney, Lawrence Friedman, a man who had handled our business affairs for 20 years and become a trusted friend. Under Josephine's direction, we created a complex estate structure. The majority of our assets would be held in trust with specific conditions for distribution. Only a smaller portion would be immediately evident to Thomas upon Josephine's passing. He'll feel betrayed when he eventually learns the truth, I warned. Josephine smiled sadly. Only if he values the money more than the lesson. As months became years, Josephine's physical strength diminished, while her mental clarity remained sharp. She used her good days to write letters for Thomas to receive at future milestones, and to plan for a foundation that would continue our philanthropic work. Thomas and Amanda's visits grew even less frequent, but their inquiries about financial matters became more persistent. During one video call, when Josephine was too weak to sit up, Amanda asked about family heirlooms and whether certain items had been designated for safekeeping. Everything that matters is already safe, Josephine replied, exchanging a meaningful look with me. In her final months, Josephine spoke often about our journey together, not the business success or material achievements, but the small moments that composed our shared life. Our first apartment with the leaky faucet, the night we stayed up painting the original store, Thomas taking his first steps between stacks of inventory. Promise me you'll remember the journey, not just the destination, she whispered one evening, and help Thomas find his own path, even if it's different from what we imagined for him. I promised, not fully understanding the challenge that lay ahead. 2 weeks before she passed, Josephine had a remarkably good day. She asked to sit by the window overlooking the lake, and we spent hours reminiscing and planning. That afternoon, she made me promise something specific. When I'm gone, Thomas will show you who he truly is, she said. Don't react in anger, no matter what happens. Respond with purpose. I nodded, thinking she was being unnecessarily pessimistic about our son. Despite his flaws, surely grief would bring out his better nature. In her final days, Josephine slipped in and out of consciousness. During her lucid moments, she spoke primarily to me, occasionally asking for Thomas. He visited once, standing awkwardly at the foot of her bed while she slept, departing before she woke. He's busy with work, Amanda explained as they left. This is such a difficult time for him. I said nothing, focusing instead on making Josephine's final days peaceful and comfortable. We had said everything that needed saying during our years together. Now, presence mattered more than words. The morning Josephine died began with unusual serenity. Dawn broke over Lake Michigan, painting the water with streaks of amber and rose. I had been sleeping in the armchair beside her bed, as I had for months. Something caused me to wake, just as the first light touched her face. Her breathing had changed, becoming shallower. I reached for her hand, thin and cool in mine. Her eyes fluttered open, focusing on me with surprising clarity. Ibrahim, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Thank you for the adventure. I kissed her forehead, telling her I loved her. Had always loved her from that first moment in the diner. She smiled faintly, squeezed my fingers with the last of her strength, and closed her eyes. 6 minutes later, she was gone, slipping away so quietly that the moment of transition was almost imperceptible. I sat holding her hand for nearly an hour afterward, not ready to notify anyone, selfishly wanting these final moments alone with the woman who had been my partner in everything for nearly 5 decades. Only when the hospice nurse arrived for her morning check did reality begin to assert itself. The nurse called the doctor, who arrived to officially pronounce what we already knew. I contacted the funeral home Josephine had selected months earlier. Their representative arrived by mid-morning, respectful and efficient. We had discussed every detail in advance, from the simple wooden casket to the private service. Josephine had wanted everything handled with minimal fuss. Do you have someone staying with you, Mr. Wallace? the funeral director asked as he prepared to leave. Family or friends who can provide support. I assured him that my son would be arriving soon, though I hadn't yet called Thomas. Part of me dreaded making that call, transforming Josephine's death from a personal grief to a shared event requiring management and explanations. When I finally reached Thomas shortly before noon, his response was predictably distant. "We'll catch the next flight out," he said, his voice formal, as if speaking to a business associate rather than his bereaved father. "Amanda will make hotel reservations. You can stay here," I offered. "There's plenty of room." A pause. "That won't be necessary. We'll be more comfortable at a hotel." Thomas and Amanda arrived 7 hours later. By then, I had sat with my grief alone, wandering through the house, touching items Josephine had selected or used, her reading glasses still on her nightstand, her gardening gloves by the back door, half-finished crossword puzzles with answers in her precise handwriting. "Dad," Thomas said when they entered, giving me a brief, awkward embrace. He looked remarkably composed in his tailored suit, as if arriving for a business meeting. Amanda hugged me more warmly, though her eyes were dry, and quickly began surveying the room, cataloging its contents. "You look exhausted," she commented. "Have you eaten? Should I order something?" Before I could answer, Thomas cut in. "We should discuss arrangements, the funeral, notifications, legal matters." I explained that most arrangements were already in place according to Josephine's wishes. Thomas frowned at this, clearly displeased not to be taking charge. "What about the will?" he asked, with a directness that surprised even me. "We should contact your attorney sooner rather than later." "Lawrence will meet with us the day after the funeral," I replied. "That's what your mother wanted." Amanda placed a hand on Thomas's arm, a subtle signal I'd observed before when he was being too obvious. "Of course, Ibrahim. Everything should be done according to Josephine's wishes. We're just here to support you." They insisted on ordering dinner from an expensive restaurant, though I had no appetite. Throughout the meal, they alternated between perfunctory expressions of sympathy and thinly disguised inquiries about assets. "Mom always loved that painting," Thomas remarked, indicating a small original by a Chicago artist that had indeed been one of Josephine's favorites. "She mentioned wanting me to have it someday." I didn't recall Josephine expressing any such desire, but lacked the energy to contradict him. "This house must feel enormous for just one person," Amanda commented while picking at her salad. "Have you thought about what you'll do now?" "It's been less than 12 hours, I reminded her quietly. "Of course," she backpedaled smoothly. "It's just that grief counselors recommend planning for practical changes. Downsizing can be therapeutic." After dinner, they retreated to the guest bedroom to make calls. Through the partially open door, I overheard fragments of their conversation. "Seems like everything's going to the foundation. Least $3 million tied up there. Remaining liquid assets. The Manhattan property. Retirement communities in Arizona have excellent amenities." I retreated to the master bedroom, closing the door on their scheming. Surrounded by Josephine's belongings, I felt her absence acutely. The bedsheets still held a trace of her scent. I curled around her pillow, allowing myself to fully feel the crushing weight of loss for the first time. The funeral 2 days later was small, as Josephine had requested. A handful of longtime friends and former employees attended, sharing quiet stories of how she had touched their lives. Thomas delivered a brief, polished eulogy that somehow missed capturing anything essential about his mother. It could have described any generic good woman, rather than the specific, vibrant force Josephine had been. That evening, back at the house, Thomas and Amanda cornered me in the study. Thomas held a tumbler of expensive scotch he had brought with him, not bothering to offer me any. "Dad, we need to discuss practical matters," he began, his tone suggesting he was being courageous by broaching difficult subjects. "This house, for instance. It's far too large for you to maintain alone." "I can manage," I replied. "But should you have to?" Amanda interjected, with practiced concern. "We've been researching some wonderful senior living communities. Private apartments, excellent dining options, medical staff on site." I remained silent, thinking of Josephine's warning about how Thomas would reveal himself. "The truth is, Dad," Thomas continued, emboldened by my silence, You shouldn't be rattling around in this big house by yourself at your age. It's not safe or sensible. I'm 70, not 90, I reminded him. Thomas's expression hardened, the pretense of concern slipping. Look, we all know this situation isn't sustainable. Amanda and I think it would be best if you sold this house and moved into assisted living. The proceeds from the sale could supplement whatever's left after Mom's medical expenses. The assumption that Josephine's illness had depleted our finances revealed more about Thomas's thinking than he realized. I wondered how long he had been tallying potential expenses against his expected inheritance. I'll consider your suggestion, I said neutrally. This placid response seemed to frustrate Thomas, who perhaps expected resistance he could label as irrational. He finished his scotch in one swallow and set the glass down with unnecessary force. There's no sense being stubborn about this. You're elderly, alone, and frankly, not equipped to make these decisions yourself right now. Amanda shot him a warning look, but he ignored her. The scotch and the stress had loosened his facade. We've already looked at places for you. There's a facility in Phoenix with immediate availability. We can handle the house sale and moving arrangements. That's very thoughtful, I said, my toneless response clearly irritating him further. Damn it, Dad. Why do you have to make everything difficult? Mom always gave in to your stubborn independence, but she's not here to coddle you anymore. The invocation of Josephine as a weapon struck deep, but I maintained my composure, remembering her final advice. It's been a difficult day, I said. Perhaps we should continue this discussion tomorrow. Thomas stood abruptly, looming over me in a posture of unconscious intimidation. There's nothing to discuss. This house will be sold. You're moving to assisted living. That's the sensible solution, and what's going to happen. I looked at my son, truly seeing him perhaps for the first time, not as the baby we had welcomed, the child we had raised, or the man we had hoped he would become, but as the person he actually was, shaped by privilege and entitlement we had unintentionally fostered. No, I said simply. His face flushed dark with anger. Pack your bags, he shouted. The old man doesn't belong here. This house is as good as mine now, and I decide who stays in it. The raw truth of his character, fully revealed in that unguarded moment, would have devastated Josephine. But she had prepared me for exactly this. I nodded calmly. All right. My acquiescence clearly surprised him. His momentum faltered as I stood and walked toward the master bedroom. Wait, what are you doing? Amanda called after me. Packing my bags, I answered simply. As requested, I packed methodically, selecting only what mattered most. Photographs of Josephine from across our decades together, the first dollar we earned at Wallace Hardware, framed on my office wall, her favorite scarf that still carried traces of her perfume. Practical clothing and toiletries went into a separate suitcase. Thomas and Amanda watched from the doorway, their expressions shifting between triumph and uncertainty as I worked silently. Where will you go? Amanda finally asked, perhaps realizing their planning hadn't extended to immediate logistics. I'll find a hotel tonight, I replied. Don't concern yourself. Thomas crossed his arms. We can drive you to the airport tomorrow. Your flight to Phoenix leaves at 11. I looked up sharply. You purchased a ticket without consulting me? He shrugged, unapologetic. It needed to be done. The retirement community is expecting you tomorrow afternoon. The depth of presumption was breathtaking. They had orchestrated an entire life transition without my knowledge or consent, less than 72 hours after Josephine's death. In that moment, I understood Josephine's foresight with painful clarity. I won't be on that flight, I stated firmly, zipping my suitcase closed. Now you're just being difficult, Thomas snapped. I shouldered past them, without further comment, carrying my bags to the front door. Thomas followed, his frustration mounting visibly. This is ridiculous. Where do you think you're going? You can barely take care of yourself. I turned to face my son one last time before leaving. I raised you, ran a multi-million-dollar business, and cared for your mother through 3 years of cancer. I believe I can manage a hotel reservation. Without waiting for his response, I walked out the door of the home Josephine and I had shared, uncertain when or if I would return. The evening air felt cool against my face as I placed my bags in the trunk of my car and drove away, watching Thomas's diminishing figure in the rearview mirror. I checked into a business hotel downtown, choosing an anonymous, comfortable space to gather my thoughts. Sitting on the edge of the bland hotel bed, the enormity of the day's events finally overwhelmed me. Josephine was gone. My son had revealed himself as a stranger. The life I had known had evaporated in less than 24 hours. Sleep evaded me that night. Instead, I sat by the window, watching the city lights, thinking about Josephine's final advice. Don't react in anger. Respond with purpose. What purpose could I find in this bleakest of moments? Morning brought no greater clarity, but it did bring a scheduled appointment with Lawrence Friedman. Our attorney had been a friend for decades, handling everything from our business acquisitions to Josephine's carefully constructed estate plan. His downtown office offered a familiar sanctuary as I arrived, still wearing yesterday's clothes. Ibrahim, he greeted me with genuine warmth, clasping my hand in both of his. I was so sorry to hear about Josephine. She was truly remarkable. Thank you, Lawrence, I replied, the simple acknowledgement of her exceptionality bringing fresh grief to the surface. His keen eyes took in my disheveled appearance. You look like you could use some coffee, strong coffee, and perhaps a friendly ear before we address business matters. Over steaming mugs in his private office, I recounted the previous day's confrontation with Thomas. Lawrence listened without interruption, his expression growing increasingly troubled. Unfortunately, this doesn't surprise me, he admitted when I finished. Josephine anticipated something like this might happen. She knew our son better than I did, I acknowledged with sadness. Lawrence nodded gravely. She loved Thomas deeply, but she saw him clearly. That's why she structured things the way she did. He reached for a thick file on his desk. Are you ready to review the details of her estate plan? For the next 2 hours, Lawrence walked me through the intricate arrangements Josephine had designed during her final years. The $40 million from our business sale had been carefully allocated. $5 million would go immediately to our foundation, supporting education for underprivileged youth. Another $5 million was placed in a trust for Thomas, with graduated distributions over 20 years. The remaining $30 million, along with the Manhattan penthouse, was placed in a separate trust with me, as both beneficiary and trustee. Thomas would eventually inherit these assets as well, but only after meeting specific conditions Josephine had established. She was concerned about his values and character, Lawrence explained. She wanted to ensure the money would benefit him, rather than corrupt him further. Does Thomas know any of this yet? I asked. Lawrence shook his head. The initial reading tomorrow will only reveal the first layer. He'll learn about the $5 million trust, which is substantial but far less than the total estate. The larger trust and the penthouse won't be disclosed unless certain conditions are met. He'll be furious, I predicted. Probably, Lawrence agreed. But Josephine believed it was necessary for his growth. The question is, what do you want to do now? I considered the options before me. I could return to the lake house and assert my legal ownership, forcing a confrontation with Thomas. I could move permanently to the Manhattan penthouse, distancing myself from the immediate situation. Neither approach felt right. Josephine said to respond with purpose, not anger. I mused aloud. I need time to determine what that purpose should be. Lawrence handed me a set of keys. The penthouse is fully furnished and ready for occupancy. It might provide a good temporary sanctuary while you decide your next steps. That afternoon, I flew to New York, leaving no forwarding information with Thomas. The Manhattan penthouse occupied the top 2 floors of an elegant pre-war building on the Upper East Side. Josephine had purchased it 3 years earlier as an investment property, occasionally using it when visiting Thomas or attending cultural events in the city. Stepping into the space felt surreal. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic views of Central Park. Original artwork graced the walls, and custom furnishings occupied the spacious rooms. It was beautiful but impersonal, lacking the warmth of a true home. I spent that first evening in New York making phone calls to old friends, people who had known both Josephine and me throughout our journey. Martin Geller, our first employee at Wallace Hardware, now retired in Florida. Sophia Winters, Josephine's college roommate who had attended our courthouse wedding as a witness. Daniel Abrams, the banker who approved our first business loan when larger institutions turned us down. These connections to our shared past provided comfort, but also clarity. Each conversation reinforced what Josephine and I had valued throughout our lives: integrity, hard work, compassion, and community. The wealth had been a byproduct, never the purpose. 2 days later, Lawrence called to report on the initial will reading. Thomas didn't take it well, he stated with characteristic understatement. He seems to have expected substantially more than the $5 million trust. Did he mention our conversation from the night Josephine died? His plans for the house and for me? Not directly, Lawrence replied. But he did ask repeatedly about additional assets. He seemed convinced there must be more. And you maintained the confidentiality we discussed? Of course. He was informed only of what Josephine intended at this stage. He also asked for your whereabouts, which I explained I wasn't at liberty to disclose. Over the following week, Thomas called my cell phone repeatedly. I let the calls go to voicemail, listening to messages that evolved from demanding to cajoling to threatening. Amanda tried a softer approach, leaving messages expressing concern for my well-being while subtly probing for financial information. Meanwhile, I began formulating the plan that would become my response to Thomas's betrayal. If Josephine had been right about his negative qualities, perhaps she was also right about his capacity for growth. The challenge was creating circumstances that might catalyze such transformation. I contacted the board of our foundation, explaining my desire to expand its mission and funding. I reached out to educators and social workers who understood the challenges facing disadvantaged youth. I consulted financial advisors about structuring meaningful work requirements that could be tied to inheritance. 3 weeks after leaving Chicago, I felt ready to re-engage with my son, not in anger but with clear purpose. I texted him a simple dinner invitation for the following evening, including the Manhattan address without explanation. His response came within minutes. "We'll be there. We have a lot to discuss." The stage was set for what Josephine might have called a teaching moment. I spent the day preparing, not just the logistics of the evening, but my own emotions. This wasn't about punishing Thomas or expressing my disappointment. It was about offering him an opportunity to reconnect with values that money couldn't buy. As I arranged fresh flowers in the penthouse dining room, I felt Josephine's presence more strongly than at any time since her death. "I'm trying to honor your wisdom," I whispered to the empty room. "Help me find the right words." Thomas and Amanda arrived precisely at 7, stepping off the private elevator with expressions of poorly concealed shock as they took in the penthouse. Their eyes cataloged the artwork, furnishings, and spectacular views with rapidly calculating assessment. "Quite a place you've found, Dad," Thomas commented, his tone carefully neutral. "Temporary accommodation?" "Welcome," I replied, ignoring his question. "Can I offer you something to drink?" Amanda moved to the floor-to-ceiling windows, gazing at Central Park below. "This building is one of the most exclusive addresses in Manhattan. How did you arrange a short-term rental here?" I poured 3 glasses of wine, handing them each one. "It's not a rental." Thomas nearly choked on his first sip. "Not a rental? You mean you purchased this?" "Not recently," I clarified. "Your mother bought this property 3 years ago. It's been in our portfolio since then." The calculated friendliness in their expressions faltered. Thomas set his glass down with deliberate control. "That's not possible," he stated flatly. "Mom's medical expenses depleted your savings. Lawrence made that clear when he reviewed the will. Lawrence shared exactly what your mother instructed him to share at that time," I corrected gently. "There's considerably more to the estate than what was initially disclosed." Amanda moved closer to Thomas, their shoulders touching in unconscious alliance. "What exactly are you saying, Ibrahim?" I gestured toward the dining table, already set for our meal. "Let's discuss it over dinner. The caterers have prepared something special." Throughout the first course, Thomas maintained a facade of patience, though I could see questions burning behind his eyes. Amanda, ever more tactical, attempted to draw me out with seemingly casual inquiries about the neighborhood and building amenities. As the main course was served, Thomas finally abandoned pretense. "Enough small talk, Dad. What's going on? What did you mean about there being more to the estate? And how do you suddenly have access to a multi-million-dollar penthouse?" I dabbed my napkin against my lips, taking my time before answering. "Your mother and I built a substantial fortune through our business. After taxes and allocations to employees, We retained approximately $40 million from the sale. Thomas's fork clattered against his plate. $40 million? That's impossible. Where is that money? Why wasn't it disclosed in the will? $5 million went immediately to our foundation, I explained calmly. Another $5 million was placed in the trust for you that Lawrence described. The remaining $30 million, along with this penthouse, was placed in a separate trust with specific conditions for distribution. Amanda's composure slipped completely. $30 million? And this apartment? But why would Josephine hide this? She didn't hide it, I corrected. She structured it thoughtfully, based on her observations and concerns. Thomas's face flushed with anger. What concerns could possibly justify concealing this level of wealth from your only son? It's my inheritance. Is it? I asked quietly. Your mother believed inheritance isn't only about money. It's about values, character, purpose. Spare me the philosophical lecture, Thomas snapped. We're talking about $30 million that rightfully belongs to me. I studied my son's face, seeing in it echoes of the little boy who once followed me around our first hardware store, eager to help and learn. Somewhere along the way, that curious child had been lost. The night your mother died, I said carefully, you demanded I leave my home. You had already purchased a plane ticket sending me to a retirement community without my knowledge or consent. You called me the old man and said I didn't belong in the house your mother and I built together. Amanda winced visibly. Thomas at least had the grace to look momentarily uncomfortable. That was a difficult night for everyone, he muttered. Grief makes people say things they don't mean. Perhaps, I acknowledged. But your mother anticipated exactly that scenario. She worried that money had become more important to you than people, including your parents. That's ridiculous, Thomas protested. Of course I care about you and Mom, but practicality matters too. That house is too big for one person. Senior living makes sense at your age. The practicality you describe conveniently consolidated assets under your control while removing me from the equation. Thomas began to object, but Amanda placed a restraining hand on his arm. Ibrahim, she said, adopting a conciliatory tone, we only want what's best for everyone. Clearly there were misunderstandings. Now that we understand the full picture, we can make better arrangements. The swift pivot to appeasement was exactly what I had expected. I nodded thoughtfully, as if considering her words. That's why I invited you here tonight, to establish clarity and new arrangements moving forward. Thomas leaned forward eagerly. Exactly. A fresh start. So how is the trust structured? When do distributions begin? The trust is relatively straightforward, I explained. The $30 million and this property will eventually transfer to you. However, there are conditions that must be met first. What conditions? Thomas asked suspiciously. Primary among them is meaningful involvement with the Wallace Family Foundation. Josephine expanded its mission substantially in her final year. The foundation now focuses on educational opportunities for disadvantaged youth and entrepreneurship training for communities like the one where your mother and I began. Amanda's smile remained fixed, but her eyes had grown calculating. That sounds wonderful. Thomas would be happy to serve on the board, attend quarterly meetings, that sort of thing. I shook my head. The requirement is more substantial. Full-time employment with the foundation for a minimum of 5 years. Hands-on involvement with its programs and participants. A salary commensurate with non-profit sector standards rather than corporate expectations. Thomas's face registered shock, followed quickly by outrage. That's absurd. I have a career in venture capital. I'm not going to abandon that to work for poverty wages at some charity for 5 years. Then the trust assets will remain inaccessible, I stated simply. After my death, if the conditions remain unmet, the entire amount transfers directly to the foundation instead. Amanda's composure cracked completely. This is manipulative and cruel. Josephine couldn't have intended to put such unreasonable restrictions on Thomas's inheritance. I reached into my jacket pocket and removed a sealed envelope. She left this for this exact moment. Her words, not mine. Thomas snatched the envelope, tearing it open with shaking hands. As he read Josephine's handwritten letter, his expression cycled through disbelief, anger, and finally, a flicker of shame. Mom really believed I cared more about money than people, he said quietly, letting the letter fall to the table. She believed you had lost your way, I corrected gently. But she also believed you could find it again. By forcing me into servitude at your foundation? He demanded, anger resurfacing. By giving you an opportunity to reconnect with what truly mattered to her and me. Not the wealth we accumulated, but the lives we touched, the communities we served, the values we tried to instill in you. Thomas pushed back from the table abruptly. This is emotional blackmail. I'll contest the will. No court would uphold such ridiculous conditions. I had anticipated this reaction as well. You're welcome to try. Lawrence prepared extensive documentation of your mother's competence and intentions. He also documented your statements and behavior following her death, which unfortunately aligned perfectly with her concerns. Amanda, ever pragmatic, placed her hand on Thomas's arm again. $30 million, Thomas. Even with a reduced salary for 5 years. That's substantial compensation. Thomas shook off her hand. It's the principle. They had no right to control my life this way. Not control, I corrected. Guide. Offer perspective. Your mother wanted you to experience something beyond the pursuit of wealth for its own sake. To understand what we built and why. Thomas stood, pulling Amanda up with him. I need time to think. This is a lot to process. I nodded, remaining seated. Take whatever time you need. The foundation position will remain available. In the meantime, I'll be dividing my time between Chicago and here. You're going back to the lake house? Thomas asked, surprised. It's my home, I replied simply. I never intended to leave it permanently. As they prepared to depart, Thomas turned back with a puzzled expression. That night, when I told you to get out, you just said, all right, and left. Why didn't you stand up for yourself? I met my son's gaze directly. Because your mother taught me that sometimes the best response isn't immediate confrontation. Sometimes it's strategic patience. She called it the long game of love. After they left, I stood at the window watching city lights flicker across the park. The confrontation had unfolded largely as expected, but the outcome remained uncertain. Would Thomas accept the opportunity for growth, or would pride and entitlement keep him trapped in patterns that ultimately brought no fulfillment? Only time would tell, but either way, I had honored Josephine's final wishes. I had responded not with anger, but with purpose. 6 months passed before Thomas contacted me again. During that time, I established a rhythm between the Chicago house and the Manhattan penthouse, spending time in both places as the seasons changed. The Wallace Family Foundation expanded its programming under my guidance, reaching more underprivileged youth with educational opportunities and entrepreneurial mentorship. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon as I reviewed grant applications in the Chicago office. Dad, Thomas said when I answered, his voice subdued. Could we meet? Just the two of us this time. We arranged to meet at a small cafe near his Manhattan office. He arrived looking noticeably different than at our last encounter. The impeccable suit remained, but his expression carried a weariness I hadn't seen before. The venture fund I was working with closed down, he explained after ordering coffee. Capital dried up, investors pulled out. I'm sorry to hear that, I responded sincerely. Have you found another position? He shook his head. I've had interviews. Nothing has materialized yet. He paused, turning his cup slowly on the saucer. Amanda left last month. Said she hadn't signed up for financial uncertainty. The news didn't surprise me, though I took no pleasure in his pain. That must be difficult. Turns out she had very specific expectations about our financial future, he said with a hollow laugh. When those changed, so did her commitment level. We sat in silence for a moment, the ambient noise of the cafe filling the space between us. I've been thinking about Mom's letter, Thomas finally continued. About what you both built and why. About the foundation position. It remains available, I confirmed. I'd like to try, he said, the admission clearly difficult for him. Not because of the trust conditions, though obviously that factors in, but because I need to understand what was so important to you and Mom, what you valued beyond the money. 2 weeks later, Thomas began working at the foundation as a program coordinator. His business background provided useful skills, though the adjustment to nonprofit culture proved challenging. He bristled at the limited resources, the bureaucratic hurdles of grant requirements, the modest office furnishings. "How did you and Mom maintain enthusiasm through all these constraints?" he asked one evening after a particularly frustrating day. "By focusing on people, not processes," I explained. "Each form you complete, each budget you balance, represents a young person whose life might change direction because of that work." Slowly, Thomas began to engage more deeply with the Foundation's mission. He developed relationships with the young participants, listening to their stories and challenges. He stayed late to help students with college applications and business proposals. Gradually, his complaints about administrative frustrations gave way to excitement about participant breakthroughs. 3 months into his tenure, he approached me with his first independent initiative, a mentorship program pairing successful entrepreneurs with promising students from the most underserved communities. "The kids have the talent and drive," he explained enthusiastically. "They just lack the networks and guidance that more privileged students take for granted." I recognized Josephine's influence in his thinking and felt a warmth I hadn't experienced since her passing. Her wisdom continued to shape our family, even in her absence. As Thomas immersed himself in the Foundation work, I found myself mentoring young entrepreneurs who reminded me of my younger self. Ambitious, hard-working individuals with sound ideas but limited resources. I established a microloan program through the Foundation, providing not just capital but guidance through the challenges of early business development. 1 year after Thomas joined the Foundation, we held our annual fundraising gala. Thomas had taken the lead in organizing the event, bringing together Foundation participants, donors, and community partners. Standing at the podium addressing the gathered crowd, he spoke with passion about the Foundation's mission. "My parents started with nothing but determination and principles," he told the audience. "They built something significant, not just financially, but in terms of impact and relationships. This foundation continues their legacy of creating opportunity for others." Watching from my table, I felt Josephine's presence strongly. She would have been proud of the growth she had orchestrated through her careful planning. Later that evening, Thomas sought me out as the event wound down. "I need to apologize," he said quietly, "for what happened the night Mom died. For what I said and did. It's in the past," I assured him. He shook his head. "It needs to be acknowledged. I was focused entirely on what I thought I deserved rather than what you were experiencing. I was cruel when you were grieving. Your mother anticipated that moment," I reminded him. "She understood you better than either of us realized. She was trying to help me, wasn't she? With all the trust conditions and requirements." I nodded. "She called it her final gift to you. Not the money itself, but the opportunity to discover what truly matters." As Thomas approached his 2nd year with the Foundation, the transformation became increasingly evident. He moved from a modest but comfortable apartment, simplifying his lifestyle and redirecting resources toward causes he now valued. He developed genuine relationships with Foundation participants, celebrating their successes and supporting them through challenges. One Thursday afternoon, he appeared in my office doorway with an expression of quiet determination. "I want to discuss the trust," he said. My heart sank slightly, wondering if his apparent growth had been performance rather than genuine change. "What about it?" "I've been thinking about the $30 million and what that money could do if it remained with the Foundation rather than eventually transferring to me." I set down my pen, giving him my full attention. "What are you suggesting?" "A modification to the terms," he explained. "I'd like to receive a smaller portion personally, perhaps $5 million, with the remainder permanently endowing the Foundation's programs. I've discussed it with Lawrence, and he says it's possible with your agreement as trustee." The request stunned me. That would mean surrendering $25 million of your inheritance. Thomas smiled, a genuine expression that reminded me of Josephine. "It wouldn't be surrendering anything. It would be investing it where it can do the most good. That's what you and Mom taught me, even if it took me far too long to learn the lesson." 3 years after Josephine's passing, the Wallace Family Foundation had become a significant force for positive change in communities across the country. Thomas continued his leadership role, even after fulfilling the 5-year requirement in the trust. having found purpose beyond wealth accumulation. The foundation's offices occupied a renovated warehouse in a previously neglected Chicago neighborhood, bringing jobs and revitalization to the area. Young entrepreneurs launched businesses with foundation support, creating a virtuous cycle of opportunity and community reinvestment. On the anniversary of Josephine's death each year, Thomas and I would meet privately to remember her and reflect on her legacy. During our fifth such gathering, Thomas brought a small, wrapped package. "I found this among Mom's things," he explained, handing it to me. It was labeled with today's date, 5 years after her passing. Inside was a small journal, filled with Josephine's handwriting. On the first page, she had written, "For Ibrahim and Thomas, when you found your way back to each other." The journal contained her private reflections on family, purpose, and legacy, her hopes for Thomas's growth and her confidence in my ability to guide that process, her unwavering belief that wealth was only valuable when it served values. She knew, Thomas said softly. Somehow she knew exactly what would happen and what we would need. "Your mother always played the long game," I replied, my voice thick with emotion. As I approach my 75th birthday, I divide my time between active involvement with the foundation and quiet reflection. The journey from that painful night when my son ordered me from my home to our current relationship of mutual respect and shared purpose has affirmed Josephine's wisdom repeatedly. True inheritance isn't measured in dollars or property deeds. It's the transmission of values that bring meaning and fulfillment. It's the legacy of choices made from principle rather than expedience. It's the understanding that wealth, properly viewed, is a tool for impact rather than a measure of worth. Josephine and I built our fortune dollar by dollar, starting with nothing but determination and integrity. The greatest tribute to her memory isn't the foundation that bears our name or the lives changed through its work. It's the transformation in our son, who finally understands what we valued most. What would you have done in my situation? Would you have revealed the inheritance immediately, or do you think Josephine's approach was wiser? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe to hear more reflections on family, legacy, and the true meaning of wealth. Thank you for joining me on this journey, and remember that our most valuable possessions aren't things, but the principles that guide how we use them.